All right, welcome back to John Bachman Now. Here we go again. It's now Ireland's health system saying they've been targeted by one of these ransomware attacks. Ireland's health service shutting down its IT system today after what they call a significant ransomware attack. The health services executive who runs that organization says the move was a precaution. Of course, this comes after the pipeline was hit, the Colonial pipeline was hit with one of those ransomware attacks last week. Millions of hackers, those hackers demanding millions to be paid to them in ransom. The White House keeping mum on that ransom. Here's what President Joe Biden had to say about that yesterday.
Were you briefed on the fact that the company did pay the ransom?
I have no comment on that.
All right, concerns continue to grow this afternoon over these ransomware attacks and perhaps a moral hazard that's been created here. Let's talk about this and welcome in former U.S. Ambassador to the Netherlands, former Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee as well, Pete Hoekstra. Also back with us, the President of the Center for Security Policy and a former National Security Chief of Staff under the Trump administration, Fred Fleitz. Pete, Fred, great to see you both. You know, Pete, this is something we've been talking about, Fred, you as well, for a very long time, the vulnerability to our infrastructure here. Colonial Pipeline, of course, a private company, but what is a government's responsibility, Pete, when it comes to, number one, making sure that foreign governments don't harbor these ransomware groups, and number two, making sure that the infrastructure of these private corporations is protected so we don't see what we're seeing right now on the eastern seaboard?
Well, cyberspace is a new war. It's a new space where war is conducted. I wouldn't call this ransomware. I would call this actually an act of war. Which means that, the United States government needs to respond as such. We're supposed to keep our citizens and our businesses safe and secure. So when we disrupt the eastern seaboard, when we disrupt the lives of American citizens and American businesses and our economy, that is an act of war, and we ought to treat it as such. We ought to mobilize all of our defense capabilities, our intelligence capabilities, find these people, capture them, or as others have implied, in an act in war, you may need to take these people out. We ought to enlist our allies in NATO to work with us, because what happens to us, as we're now seeing in Ireland, can happen to them. And then we need to go to where these people live and work. In this case, I don't know about Ireland, but Colonial, it looks like they're coming out of Russia. We need to send a clear message to Putin. You either help us and find these people and get rid of this safe haven of them operating in your country, or Russia will feel consequences as well. This is very, very serious. The ransomware people, these acts of war have gone into a totally new frame of reference than where we've been before.
Fred, whatever happened to not negotiating with terrorists? There are reports that the Colonial Pipeline had to pay these ransomware hackers. We've seen this in other places before. The city of Atlanta was targeted by a ransomware attack. Now it's Ireland. Where does this end? I mean, Fred mentioned some pretty aggressive tactics. Is that what it's going to take? Drone strikes on hacking facilities inside Russia to get this to stop?
Well, the reality is we often deal with terrorists, and the amount that this pipeline company paid was not much money. But John, there's two things here that people don't realize. There's a real problem with private industry not adequately implementing cyber defenses. And in addition, it's very common for large computer systems, I don't know if this is the case of the pipeline or in Ireland, to have antiquated versions of Windows because they run very expensive software programs that can't be upgraded. John, there are Pentagon systems that use Windows XP that came out in 2001, which is extremely vulnerable to hackers. So I think hackers just go around the world looking for an older version of Windows on a large computer system, and then they move in for ransom.
Again, Fred, you mentioned that, and that's kind of, emblematic of government bureaucracy, right? They have some antiquated software system that nobody can seem to upgrade, and so they leave themselves vulnerable to these hacks. Why can't the federal government keep up with this stuff? Why is it that the Pentagon is still using Windows XP for certain programs in 2021?
It's very expensive to build a new program to run a missile system, for example. They may have spent $100 million on this program. It's cheaper to keep paying a fee to Microsoft for very minor upgrades in to keep the software running, but it's still extremely vulnerable. I think you're right. We're just not making the investments necessary to keep us safe.
Is that how you see it, Pete? I mean, it just seems like the U.S. government, particularly whether it's with social media or in this instant with this type of threat, you know, Windows XP in 2021? Really?
No, I mean, as Fred pointed out, it's very, very expensive. There are government agencies that have been lazy or have not been funded by Congress to upgrade their systems. And Colonial, you know, is a private sector company. Their management team also needs to be held accountable for not putting in place the proper technology to keep their systems safe. But whether our capabilities and whether these companies or government is doing their job or not, the ultimate responsibility and the problem here is for the hackers and the people that are coming into these systems and taking them down. And with Colonial, most likely they've done it not with the direct sanction, but with the knowledge and awareness of the Russian government as to what they are doing. That is unacceptable.
Yeah, Vladimir Putin turning a blind eye on this, it appears. Joe Biden not willing to call him out on it. Fred, Pete, great to see you both. Thanks so much, guys.
Hey, good, great, thank you.